Well, welcome to the conference talk show. You know, Tom, adjusting after a year is a little tough.
I
We've been,
love I love the new name though. It rolls off the tongue. It's going back to our roots of how we got started working with hybrid events 8 years ago. So I think it's awesome.
I do too, but this readjustment, I think, is a theme that we can talk about today. Is that we have become very accustomed to doing things a certain way. You and I are certainly accustomed to this, virtual presenting thing. Tom, over the weekend was with people.
What? Like
I know.
speaking in front of a live audience?
Speaking and emceeing in front of people in a room. It
Oh
was
my.
so, to be fair, I was really anxious leading up to it because I didn't know how I was going to feel. And one of the things that made me feel better is because I was part of the planning of the conference, I was very aware of the protocols. So I knew everybody was going to be either vaccinated or have a negative COVID test. So going in there, I felt pretty comfortable. But I got to tell you, holding a microphone and being in a room with people, I really kind of missed that.
Wow, you actually got to see their facial responses, which is something we don't get to do with all the virtual stuff that we've done.
Well,
You can actually see people nod and
right,
smile.
right, right. From here, here up, but it was still great. It was fantastic, and it really makes me hopeful, optimistic about
Nice.
what the next 12 months are going to bring. And I think we learned things in the last 12, 14, 15 months that we can bring forward. And Tom, today, our guest, she told us what she does, and I think just those words together are sort of like, ooh, let's talk about that. Strategic event experience designer. How about that?
Wow.
I
I
know,
love it.
I
I
know.
love it. And I think that we are in this world where events can't do things second tier. We have to actually have that value centered engagement. We have to have that intentional design because as people come back to these in-person events, we've proven that you can get a speaker to give you some data via
Right.
Zoom. However, in order to have that full experience, we can't leave it to chance. So what she does is awesome.
So let's get to it. Please welcome Jody Hall to this conference talk show.
Welcome, Jody.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Oh, we're
Let's
glad to
just
have you here.
We absolutely are. And I'm so excited because as we were getting ready to go live, you shared with us that one of the things that you did during 2020 is to work to get an event design certificate. And the more you talked about it, the more intrigued I became about it. So tell us a little bit about what the certification is and what did you have to do to get it?
Sure. So it's a certified event designer certificate, and it's through the Event Design Collective, which is a group that teaches the specific methodology around event design.
Hmm.
So the cohort that I was involved in began in August, and we took about 3 8-hour days and met together on Zoom and used a collaboration tool called Mural. And we learned about the methodology to understand and identify your stakeholders, and
Hmm.
then look at the event through their eyes, through that perspective, and then be able to understand what behavior you want to change from them coming
Hmm.
into the event, then out of the event. So it's a really neat methodology, and it opened my eyes to how to better design event experiences for my clients.
It's interesting when you say that because I had a conversation with someone the other day who said that as we come out of what we've been through the last year plus, that events are going to be very outcome driven and
Hmm.
focused on, you use the term stakeholders and they had a different term, but I think that that's really important that we're paying attention to what the results people are going to have from coming to our event. It's not just free wine and cheese and a great band, and some cookies at noon. There has to be more to it. So when you talk about the different types of stakeholders, I just think attendees, who are the different stakeholders at
Hmm.
an event?
Yeah, and that's what becomes really kind of life-changing when you go through this methodology process. It's your attendees are absolutely your stakeholders, and sometimes you have different attendees, right? You've got student attendees or veteran attendees that are professionals, let's say in the meeting industry. But then you also have your sponsors, you've got your clients. If you're planning something like the Olympics, you also have to think about the surrounding community and potentially the hospitals that are nearby in case there's another pandemic outbreak. You also have the media who may be interested in what you're speaking on or what your conference is about. So it can run the gamut. Stakeholders includes everyone, but what we try to do is design for those key stakeholders that are really going to impact whether or not the event goes forward. You know, that could kind of shut it down if you don't make them happy. And then you focus on what their behavior is like going into the event and how you want that to change and what you want their behavior to be after they've attended your event. That could be meeting new people from the networking perspective. It could be engaging with sponsors. It could be learning something new, right? So there's all different aspects of that perspective.
That's really a shift because, you know, having the privilege of working with meeting professionals in that production piece, a lot of it is thinking about who's going to be on the stage and what is it going to look like and what types of speeches are we going to have and that sort of thing. And it's very much a what does it look like perspective. This thinking about a behavior change is very, very different. How do you really get people to buy into the idea that this is what we need to focus on instead of, as Tom said, you know, cookies at noon?
Right. So that is one of the challenges of convincing a client that you need a certain amount of time to spend on just the design portion, because it does take some time. And there's an algorithm that we use kind of based on how many attendees over how long are they going to be together. And we take a percentage of that. And that should be what you spend your time on designing before you even start reaching out to speakers and other suppliers. So, and remember, those are stakeholders too, right? So if we look at an event through the eyes of a keynote speaker, what do we need them to know or to do going into it and then leaving it, right? So they may not have necessarily a behavior change, but they were part of the impact that came with what the attendees were going to learn from them or be inspired by them. So there is still that component. And so getting the buy-in from a client to say, okay, before we start, you know, finding the venue and putting together an agenda, which may not even get you to your objectives, let's step back, let's take a breath, let's understand what our stakeholders look like, let's design for them and for what that change is that we're looking for. We put together a few prototypes and we play around with those a little bit, and then we come to the conclusion of, you know, this is the final design, so to speak, with maybe some tweaks, and then you start the actual planning process that most planners begin. You source your venues, your suppliers, you're securing your sponsors. So it's really a first step before you start planning.
I'm intrigued, and I love this whole concept of starting with the outcomes and the behavior changes that we want to have. I famously tell the story of the time I lost the potential to be the master of ceremonies for an event because they decided to take the budget at the last minute and have chocolate fountains at the cocktail party. And I remember thinking, you know, how does that impact anybody's behaviors or things like this? And, you know, I think that if you have these things set up at front and the experience of great chocolate, you know, on a marshmallow on a stick is part of the outcome that you want, then that planning makes absolute sense. But if you really want people to network and engage, maybe having an MC is the way to go. So I love the fact of starting with what is our outcomes and our behavioral changes. How do we get people to change the way they plan to do what you're talking about? How do we get planners to say, yes, this is the way I need to design my event?
Oh, that's another tough one. I mean, we first need to draw awareness to the event that that event design does have a place in our world, right? You and it doesn't have to be elaborate or extensive. It can be as simple as a small webinar or webcast that you plan to do. You just may want to rethink what your objectives are and make sure that you're always designing for those objectives. You may want a poll, you may want chat, you may want Q&A, or you may not. That might be part of the objective. But the challenge is bringing awareness to that this actually exists. I came across the Event Design Collective. They have spoke at a couple different meeting professionals international conferences, and then they offered this session, this class, and was able to become a part of it and learn from it. And then from there, I think there's only maybe 250 or maybe 300 by now certified event designers from their certificate program that exists globally. And so we start spreading the word. It's shows like yours that can help bring awareness to that there is a different way to plan these meetings and make them really not only memorable, but you're hitting your objectives and not necessarily a chocolate fountain. Although it could have been, right? If it's a chocolate conference, it might have been very, very critical to have that fountain there.
It might have been.
I don't diss the chocolate fountain. It was just when the meeting planner told me, we think you'd be great, but our CEO decided that the money should go to a chocolate fountain. I just never knew how to react to that. They should have just told me, we didn't have the budget or we went a different direction.
Right.
But I've wondered about that chocolate fountain for years.
It is very important that you set those up front so that you don't lose track, right? You can get wound up in all the cool bells and whistles that are coming down the path, especially this last year with virtual. There were so many platforms and so many different cool things that you could do. If you got sidetracked by the shiny new things, you might have lost track of your objectives. And then you're really not making that an event experience for your stakeholders that are sponsoring you or being a supplier or even attending.
Well, I think that reminds me of one of our takeaways. Tom and I did a show where we listed some of our big takeaways from doing just about 100 interviews over 2020, was that, value that's presented with heart is always going to win over gee whiz wow. As speakers, we get trapped in the, ooh, look what I can do. I can make this fly in on my screen and I can have this cool. And I think we've all seen speakers get up and be like just hogtied by their tech, especially if it goes wrong.
True.
And I'm sure that there's the event design equivalent of that, where you spend so much time thinking about the details and forget about the part that's really, what are people going to walk away with and remember 2, 3, 4 years from now. I very rarely remember the food.
Yeah, that's it's an interesting kind of phrase that you brought up. I like to say I design with intent. So the whole point is that you are constantly remembering in that prototype that you've built or that event canvas. It's like a big mural that we use with different components on it. And when you're in person, you use Post-it notes to attach there. But now that we were virtual, we used a tool called Mural, and we were able to put Post-it notes virtually. But what it does when you go back is it reminds you of why you're doing this in the first place. So if you start to get off path and you start to get sidetracked by something, then it pulls you back to say, well, is this going to make the change we need to happen? Is this going to meet those objectives? And if it's not, we really need to reconsider whether or not it's worth the value of that money. Are you intently designing? And that's really important.
You're making me think very hard about that. Really goes back to, if you come from an education standpoint, that learning objective, how are we hitting that? That makes a lot of sense. As we move into going back to face, whether that's a fully in-person meeting or a hybrid meeting, as we look at those stakeholders, do you anticipate that attendees for certain are going to have different expectations than they did in 2019?
Yeah, and I think 2020, taught us that there is a lot that we can do. It kind of gave us this creative green light that so many planners and clients were just copy, paste, repeat before 2020. And then when you had to do something different, and you had to look to virtual, or you had to get creative with swag and how sponsors were going to get activated, then it forced you to be creative. So I'm really, anticipating that creative bug hopefully has stayed with us, and we're going to be able to kind of think outside the box as we move forward. Whether it's hybrid or virtual or in person, you still need to design for your stakeholders. And you have now a virtual or an online stakeholder that is looking through that lens completely differently. They have different expectations. They are in different time zones. I mean, there's different things that they're going to need and expect, and things that you're going to want to do in order to design for whatever behavior change you need from them, which is going to be different from that in person. And so it does take a little bit more work. It's going to take a little bit more thought, but it will, in the end, it's going to achieve those objectives. And if one of those is you have, repeat conference attendees and repeat sponsors and suppliers over and over, then it's going to achieve that as one of your objectives. But again, to answer your question, what do I see coming? It's going to be a better focus on the outcomes and designing for those outcomes, because it's going to be really critical that those monies are put into the right places to get the pathway to the objectives that you're looking for.
So you bring up a really interesting point, and that is when you talk about these hybrid events, in a way, aren't you designing two events? I mean, don't you have to sort of look at your at-home audience and your in-person audience, because they have such different needs? Doesn't that sort of double down on the planning for the conference?
It can. And so, as many conferences and webcasts that I attended last year to continue to, and into this year to continue to learn and upskill myself, you'll find that there's a different perspective. From my perspective, it is designing for two. You need to think about what that virtual attendee looks like, and what their needs are and what their pains are and what you're trying to achieve with them, and how they're going to interact with your sponsors and how those sponsors are going to interact with them, right? And what's most important for both. And then you've got your in-person attendees who are having a totally different experience because they may need to, travel somewhere. So what is that going to look like for them? And how are you going to make their experience once they arrive at the event optimal for what you're trying to achieve? And so ideally, you find a way to have them intersect throughout that event so that it is not two separate events. But if it's not going to come together and achieve what you want, then you may actually have to have one virtual event and one in-person event. That's not ideal. It's ideal to have them intersect, right? Virtual still wants to talk to people, and they still want to have that engagement. You don't want to produce two events. So you really try to do, two streams at the same time that intersect throughout that meeting in different ways.
Well, that's right.
Go ahead.
We agree.
I know what you're going to say.
Go ahead, Tom.
I was going to say that's why Eliz and I profess that you need to have two MCs, because you need to have that person who is dedicated to that at-home audience, and then you need to have your traditional person who's running the stage. And that's why she and I always think that if you have a team who work together like she and I do, you can have that intersection because they can interchange with both audiences when they work as a team. So that's obviously part of what Eliz and I do, but it's also something we think is really important to meet those separate and yet together outcomes.
Absolutely.
It is a new world. It really is
exciting.
It is. I think it is a challenge and a benefit that virtual attendees now expect so much more. Like you can't just stream your main stage and say, well, there you go, there's your virtual conference. No, we expect so much more now. And we've learned that there is real value in that virtual connection. And there are things that you can do in the virtual world that you can't do in person. So really bringing together the best of both of those worlds is exciting, but to your point, is going to take some design as opposed to like, let's just stick this where we can. If you were advising somebody who's like, I've got this big event, it's going to be fall of 2022. So we got a little time, and we're thinking fall of 22, we could probably very confidently plan an in-person big event. Okay, we're all going to just cross our fingers on that. How far out would you say you would need to get, and let me give you some parameters because I know you're going to say, well, it depends. So let's say it's going to be fall of 22, let's pick September. It is going to be a 2.5 day event, and it is going to be a sales kickoff type of event. Like, here's some new products, here's what we're going to do, rah, rah, let's get going. How far out would you suggest somebody is contacting someone like you to really design that event before anything else goes into play?
It depends. Yeah. So this is where those conversations come in with a client that dive a little bit deeper, right? So are your attendees or your sponsors that they may need to network with, are they right? So now we need to think about time zones. So as we start to go through that event design methodology, we start pulling in all those kind of different components, because if we determine, let's say we did determine that it's a global audience. So you've got people that are definitely going to be virtual because they may or may not be able to travel in. We're still at that point where we don't know if they're going to be able to travel in. And let's assume we're having it in the United States and probably in Florida, because why not? We're still open, right? And then you've got your in-person attendees that are also looking to have an experience. And if it's a sales kickoff, now you're talking about some really interesting engagement and excitement, because one of your objectives is obviously to teach them about the product, but also to get them excited, right? So as they leave there, they're selling like crazy. So there's some different components that will play into that. As much time as you can get to start creating that, because you can always start the process and tweak it when you realize that, hey, you know, we've only got a few people globally. We can change this up a little bit, but we've got so many people now are coming in because they're thirsty and hungry to meet in person. So we're going to have to adjust a little bit. But you start with your broad planning process, probably at least a year out, I think would be great. We don't always kind of get that luxury. So you kind of have to work with what you have, and you just pick up the pace, and everything moves a little bit faster to find the right venue that is flexible, right? I think that's another key part of 2020 going forward. You know, we've had to learn to be flexible and agile and change things up when things go differently or awry. So thinking about so far out to 2022, you're going to have to be flexible, because now all of a sudden you might have 1,000 people attending instead of what you expected with the 300. Right. You need a larger space, or you have more people who want to attend virtually, because now you know something can happen. Now you've got to change. I won't say the pivot word. You now have to change, and you've got to focus on making that a different kind of experience. So you really have to be flexible, agile, and creative as we go forward. So you know, a year is great. At least we know we don't always get that. We might get, you know, a few months. The shorter the time frame, the less you're going to hit on something, right? It could be less quality, it could be more money, or it could be less achieving the objectives that you want to achieve if you just don't have the time to pull it together.
So Jody, as we wrap this up, I wanted to touch on something. I'm really impressed with the fact that last summer you made the decision, I am going to go get this certification from the Event Design Council. You found them through your involvement with MPI, with Meeting Professionals International. And so many people, I got certified in a coaching program. So many people have gone out and done things to better their education, to be able to better serve the meeting industry moving forward. What do you say to people who, boy, the last 15 months went by really fast and they didn't do that? Did they miss the window to go better themselves and get a certification like you did in event design or some other area that interests them?
Not at all. I think you can make the time if you want to make it a priority, right? If you want to make that change in your life, and I've also did the digital event strategist certification with PCMA. There was a lot that was happening, and a lot of those are still being offered, and now they're moving even more towards hybrid, right? Because they know that's the way it's going. So you've probably hit the window perfectly to kind of get the education on a hybrid event. But I've always been a lifelong learner. That's always been really important to me, to stay up with not just the trends, but to continually push myself and learn new things. And if you make that one of your priorities, a lot of these programs you can do on your own time. You can do them often outside of normal business hours. So a lot of times now they're recorded, right? And you can watch the recording because now everybody does that. So I found it important for myself to be able to offer that value to my clients, to be able to help them produce and execute better events. So I would definitely encourage anybody who has the time and the feasibility to jump on that and do something to help yourself just be better.
Fantastic. So if I am that person that has the September 22 sales kickoff meeting and I'm like, oh yeah, I should probably talk to Jody, how would someone get a hold of you?
Sure. So I would say start with my website, which is cherrymoonevents.com. And on there's a handy form that you can fill out and we can connect that way. You can also email me at jody.hall@cherrymoonevents.com. We'll get you started.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This was great.
It was.
My pleasure. It was great to see you guys again.
It was good to see you. So, Tom.
Wow. I'm overrun with this whole idea of starting with the outcomes when we're planning events and not starting with, wow, we have a great venue and we have a celebrity as our speaker, but actually starting with what do we need to accomplish in this event. I think that's something all of our meeting planner friends need to learn about. I think I'm excited.
I'm excited too, and I think it's going to influence how we work with clients a bit as well. I like that focus on outcomes. So if you want more of the Conference Talk Show, and let's be serious, of course you do, you can find us at webinartalkshow.live. That's where we show up on Facebook. You can
conferencetalkshow.live. We changed the name 2 weeks ago. It's all right. 3 weeks.
Yeah, but if you go to webinartalkshow.live, it still takes you there. So you can go to conferencetalkshow.live to find us on Facebook, conferencetalkshow.watch to find us on YouTube, and where would they find just information about working with us?
If they would like to know how to hire Eliz and me, or Eliz or me, go to conferencetalkshow.com, and all the information about what we do working with organizations for in-person events, virtual events, and hybrid events. It's all right there.
Absolutely. We will be back next Monday with another great guest talking about something cool in the meetings industry. Jody, thanks for being with us. That was really great.
Thanks. I'm so glad that I could meet up with you guys. I really appreciate you having me on. Like I said, bringing awareness to event design is my passion, and it wouldn't have been a better place than with the two of you, since you've made SpinCon and all those events just phenomenal.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll see you next week. Until then, have a great week. See you soon.
Bye-bye.